Right. Welcome, everybody, to House General and Housing Committee. And today is Tuesday, actually April 1st, 2025. We're hearing testimony first on Fair Housing Awareness Day today. And we're going to start with Big Hartman, Executive Director and General Counsel of the Human Rights Commission. Big, want to say your name for the record and take it away? I think you have it.
I have been here before. Thank you. For the record, my name is Big Hartman. I'm Executive Director and General Counsel of the State of Vermont Human Rights Commission. Thank you so much for having me in today. Today we're here to honor the work of our predecessors in the civil rights movement who have created our fair housing rights. And is a kickoff event for Fair Housing Month that is a month of recognizing our legal protections and the continuing fight for justice and equity in housing. So I have a little agenda for you. I'm going to try to move quickly because I'm conscious that we have other speakers that want to share today as well, and I want to make sure everyone has some time. I'm going to quickly go through an overview of the HRC for you. I think your committee has heard from me before and hopefully is somewhat familiar with how we work. And I want to share with you an overview of what fair housing protections are under Vermont law, and talk about some common fair housing cases and share some data. I'm going to try not to get too far in the weeds today with our data, but we are happy that because we have onboarded a case management system in the past year, we now are going to be able to start to build more, drill into the data about our fair housing cases and all of our cases, and begin to start to compare year by year what are the trends we're seeing and things like that, which is really exciting.
I just want to let you know, in case you don't, we do have a packed afternoon, and we've allocated half an hour for the
Absolutely.
three speakers.
Yeah, my plan is like 10 minutes here.
Great.
And allowing for some questions and saving some space and time for Kalia from the CBOEO after me. And then I think one of our students will be speaking as well. The mission of the Human Rights Commission is to promote full civil and human rights. So we are doing our best to protect people from discrimination by investigating complaints. We do not represent people. Individuals who are believing that their rights have been violated may file complaints with us, which we will investigate. And we are a very small staff of 7 employees, with about 90% of our funding coming from the general fund, and the other 10% derives from our processing of fair housing cases with HUD money. So we have 3 main buckets of discrimination protections in our state law. Today, we're going to focus on fair housing. We also have public accommodations protections and protections in employment. Our complaint process starts with an intake. Every day, we receive phone calls and emails from people who believe they have experienced discrimination and would like to file a complaint with us. We do have to be much more selective than we would like in accepting those complaints because of the very limited resources and staffing available right now. We only accept a small portion of the cases that go through an intake process with us. Because our investigations are quite comprehensive, we have 3 staff attorney investigators who are, collecting a lot of information, documents, and conducting interviews of witnesses to investigate complaints. They create investigative reports that are reviewed by the commissioners on a monthly basis, and the commissioners make decisions about whether or not there's reasonable grounds to believe that discrimination occurred. If we think that there were reasonable grounds, we have the ability to pursue an enforcement action in court. We would go to Superior Court with that, and we have the right to a jury trial in those cases, where the Human Rights Commission is the plaintiff. So when we're talking about fair housing laws, we have, federal law kind of sets the bar for what fair housing protections there are. And state law has some additional protections that don't exist under federal law. In general, fair housing means that people have the right to be treated fairly and equally, and not treated differently because they are a member of one or more legally protected categories. So you'll see the list in front of you of our legally protected categories. This encompasses both federal and state law. The special protections that exist under state law, first, I just want to say that Vermont was a trendsetter in establishing gender identity and sexual orientation as a legally protected category back in 2007. Those are not expressly protected under federal law. However, federal courts should interpret sexual discrimination to include those two legally protected categories that are expressly protected under state law. The biggest category that we see cases that are only under state law is receipt of public assistance. So if someone is on a public benefit, their income derives from something like Social Security, or they have rental assistance available to them, or a housing choice voucher, they are protected from landlords saying, well, I won't accept you as a renter because you get this type of public assistance. And we do see a need for landlords and property managers to be more informed about this legally protected category. You can go on Craigslist today probably and see someone is renting an apartment and says, no Section 8 voucher. That is unlawful. And while we are investigating those complaints when they come our way, we also are trying to do as much education and outreach for the public to know that that's unlawful. Some of the common types of complaints that we see, by far the most common complaint we receive involves disability discrimination, and that's usually going to be reasonable accommodation requests that are denied. So that reasonable accommodation is any change to how things are done in housing that might be necessary for someone who has a disability. So some common examples are things like a parking space designated close to my door, permission to have an assistance animal live with me, even if the building is a no pets building, right? Those are the kind of common examples, and we still see a high need for landlords and property managers to be informed about their duties under with respect to reasonable accommodations. We really do, as I mentioned at the bottom of this, we really do refer to HUD's guidance and documents when analyzing cases before us and when advising landlords about their duties and obligations. So that's like kind of definitely the most common type of case that we have. We see reasonable accommodation cases in housing, places of public accommodation, and employment discrimination. The second bigger category of fair housing claims that we see involve race and color-based discrimination. So this is where what we call disparate treatment, where somebody's being treated differently or denied an opportunity for housing because of their race or skin color. These cases can be very difficult to prove. Our investigators do everything we can to try to gather some objective evidence that there was discrimination that took place. This can also include things like getting treated differently by your landlord, like they never come and repair when I have maintenance requests, but they're always repairing for my neighbor who's white. Those are the kinds of, so when we can see a comparison of someone who is not in the same legally protected category getting treated better or differently, that is what we would consider like circumstantial evidence of discrimination. We are also seeing more cases involving harassment or hostile environments in housing. And those tend to be based on often more than one legally protected category. But unfortunately, we do see them based on race and color, as well as disability. And in general, I will say that sexual harassment is on the rise in all areas of our life again. Yeah.
When two people are renting dwellings side by side and one harasses the other for whatever reason, whose responsibility is it to mitigate it?
So neighbor on neighbor harassment in housing, anyone can violate fair housing rules. So a neighbor can be held liable for violating Fair Housing Act against their neighbor if they're creating a hostile environment based on a legally protected category. And also, if the landlord or the property manager, the person who's responsible for the property, has knowledge of that harassment and then fails to take prompt and appropriate action to stop it, they may also be held liable.
Okay.
So we do see those cases come in quite regularly. And they tend to be more complicated cases than a reasonable accommodation request, because you're talking usually about some ongoing behavior and the impact that it's having on the person's housing, and whether the landlord was on notice of the behavior and what measures they may have taken to address it. And people also have a right to be free of retaliation in their housing. So if you've complained about discrimination or you've made a reasonable accommodation request, and then all of a sudden you're served with a no-cause eviction or something else changes in your housing, that could be considered retaliation. And that is something that we are trying our best to address when we see it. So I have a few more slides there. They've been handed out to you. I've covered a few things already about reasonable accommodations and what that means, and examples of common reasonable accommodation requests. And then the last two slides just kind of summarize some of the data that we're seeing. In general, we have seen an uptick in housing inquiries to our office and an uptick in complaints that we're accepting for investigation. We've almost doubled our the number of new fair housing complaints that we've accepted this year as compared to years in the past. And we're trying our best to streamline our process so we can close more of those cases out in order to be able to accept more. But we do not feel right now that we are able to meet the needs of our community members who are experiencing housing discrimination. We work every day with our partners at CDOEO and Vermont Legal Aid in providing referrals, and they provide referrals to us all the time. And we're seeing all of us feeling a little bit of anxiety about what's happening at the federal level and some risk of losing funding in the years to come. So really feel like we have our work cut out for us today. And we're really glad that the State House has been so welcoming in having us talk about these issues here today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next witness will be Collier Livingston. Big, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to talk.
I understand
Is
you
the
might be
particular-
here Friday.
I could, yes, I could do that.
Okay.
Is there a particular kind of fair housing complaint that you've seen you said they were doubled so far this year? Is there a particular type?
It's all those, the disability discrimination, the disparate treatment based on race and color, harassment in housing. Those are the big categories.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, you haven't been here, so we'll introduce ourselves to you.
Great.
You can introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Ashley Bartley. I serve Fairfax in Georgia. I'm Leah Dodge. I represent Essex and part of the city of Essex Junction. Good to see you.
I'm Joe Parsons, represent towns of Newbury, Thompson, and Groton.
Hi, I'm Tom Charlton. I represent Athens, Chester, Wyndham, and Grafton.
I'm Debbie Dolgan. I represent St. Johnsbury, Concord, and Kirby.
I'm Mary Howard and I represent Rutland City District 6.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burrows and I represent Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Hi, Sadia Lamont from Washington District.
Hi, I'm Mark Mahoney and I'm chair and I represent Callis, Plainfield and Marshfield. Tell us your name for the record and please go on and tell us what you want to talk to us about.
Great. Thank you. Nice to meet all of you. My name is Kalia Livingston, and I work at the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity. My role is the Fair Housing Project Education and Outreach Coordinator. So as many of you may or may not know, CVOEO is one of the state's 5 community action agencies, and we serve the northern part of the state. Yearly, we serve around 10,000 households, which can equate to about 20,000 individuals through interconnected client-centered programs and services. So things like rental assistance, fuel assistance. We have some housing advocates and different programs and tools to help combat poverty and work towards social, racial, economic, and environmental justice. The Fair Housing Project is specifically part of CVOEO's statewide housing advocacy programs. And with the Fair Housing Project, we are a resource for Vermonters to reach out to us with any fair housing related questions or concerns. One of the things that we do is offer fair housing workshops to any interested parties, tenants, homeowners, municipalities, legislators, anyone interested in fair housing training. And we also do individual fair housing consultations. So through our housing advocacy programs, we have a Vermont Tenants program, which has our Vermont Tenant Hotline. And that hotline receives around 3,000 emails and calls each year. And many of those calls are to help navigate different rental housing situations, including people looking for information about their general rights and responsibilities as a tenant. A lot of questions regarding rent increases come up and rights around security deposits and who's responsible for repairs and things like that. And people also call when experiencing or feel like they're experiencing illegal housing discrimination, which is when they would get connected to myself or Jess Hyman, and we would do a fair housing consultation. Many of the people who reach out to us are members of communities that are vulnerable to experiencing housing discrimination, and many of them have barriers and economic limitations that affect their ability to have peaceful enjoyment in their space or even access to housing in the first place. The Fair Housing Project is the only fair housing program in the state that is solely dedicated to outreach and education. And we work very closely with our enforcement partners, the Vermont Human Rights Commission, as well as Vermont Legal Aid. We don't give any legal advice, but we do refer folks to either of those spaces if it seems like they need legal support or need to file a complaint regarding an act of illegal housing discrimination. So the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, but we still continue to see lots of illegal housing discrimination in our state. Many of the calls that we get are based on discrimination of people with disabilities, based on race or skin color and family status. Those are some of the main protected classes where we see these breaches of fair housing laws. And people will reach out to us needing assistance to make reasonable accommodation requests or modifications. And people also just kind of need someone to listen to their situation and figure out what the next best steps are. So we can assist them with filing a complaint or just send them resources to do so themselves. Since 1968, the Fair Housing Act was passed. There was also a provision known as affirmatively furthering fair housing that was included into the Fair Housing Act, which has recently been terminated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So now more than ever, it's important that we really act on fair housing laws and educate people about what fair housing is. It's very, very unclear as to what fair housing enforcement will look like at a federal level. So that's why I'm here to speak with all of you and make some suggestions about what could be beneficial when working on housing legislation in the future. Some examples of things that I've dealt with when doing fair housing consultations include, I worked with a student who was a recent graduate and needed help breaking a lease. So I advised them with filling out a reasonable accommodation request in order to break that lease because they were experiencing relentless bullying from their roommates and it was exacerbating an anxiety disorder. So a lot of people are unaware of what protected classes are and if they have membership in those classes. So we've been a really great resource to help educate people on those things and figure out what their protections are and how they can execute their rights. Some of our fair housing training is also offered to housing providers in person, also in our on-demand program that we have online. Over 200 housing providers participate with our fair housing training, all of which are recipients of Vermont Housing Improvement Program funds, which it's required for those folks to get fair housing training.
Can I ask you just a couple of really quick questions?
Yeah.
So you just said that VHIP requires fair housing training. How extensive is that training?
I don't know what it needs to cover, but I do believe they have to earn some kind of certificate or get signed off that they took a fair housing training.
And can you or will you at some point describe how you work with the Human Rights Commission and or with Vermont Legal Aid?
Yeah, so when people reach out to us and just kind of express what their situation is, we can inform them of what fair housing laws are, what the protected classes are, and talk about if they have membership in any of those classes and kind of help them discern if they potentially have experienced an act of illegal housing discrimination or a series of acts of discrimination. And I let them know that it's within their right to file a complaint. So I can send them the resources to do that, to file a complaint with the Vermont Human Rights Commission, or I can assist them with filling out the housing questionnaire. And if they've been discriminated against based on a protected class that's also acknowledged at the federal level, they can file a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So I can do both of those things for them. And if it's something where someone is in the legal eviction process or has received a summons, then we would refer them to Vermont Legal Aid because that's out of our scope of expertise. We're not attorneys, so we can't give any legal advice.
Can I ask one more question?
Please go ahead and be aware we're a little short on
Really
time.
quick. So CVOEO does cover the whole state?
Yes, for our housing advocacy program.
How?
Through our hotline
Through a
and
hotline. Okay,
we
gotcha.
offer workshops all across the state. Part of my role is to do outreach to different organizations and groups, and libraries are a really good resource to reach out to those folks and schedule workshops. And it's given me the opportunity to get all around the state and teach people about fair housing.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Just to end on a couple of notes, some suggestions that we have in mind as you all continue to do the great work that you're doing in passing housing legislation, with hopes that you can consider some of these things as you are moving forward. One of which is requiring fair housing education anytime state funds are used to support private housing development, including communities of people that are vulnerable to housing discrimination as protected classes, which we see in Bill H169. And hoping that groups of people who are considered vulnerable to potentially experience housing discrimination can have extra protections and priorities. Authorize rent stabilization for all Vermonters with more specific protection for people with fixed incomes. It's not necessarily a fair housing related issue, but I have worked with many clients who may be experiencing illegal housing discrimination and also have economic barriers and live on a fixed income. So when they're posed with an issue of potentially experiencing discrimination, it's really difficult for them to figure out what their next step can be and where they might be able to live if they can't sustain the housing that they currently have. And the last thing is making policies designed to fund and reduce barriers to housing development that include provisions for perpetually affordable housing. And I will end there. I thank you all so much for hearing me and thank you for the work that you're doing. I appreciate it.
Thank you for
so
coming.
much.
Really appreciate it. Our
Thank you.
next witness is Leo Beebe. Leo, you want to come up and tell us your name and whatever you want to say?
Thank you.
President Brett.
Don't, it's a straw, it's a straw.
Leo, you want to start by telling us your name for the record?
Yes, so unfortunately, my name is Leo Beebe. Unfortunately, the student who wanted to testify could not make it today. So I'm going to be reading his statement as a proxy for what he wanted you all to know. So I guess I'll just start kind of by telling you guys who he is. His name is Donatello Vitale. He goes to Colchester School District. He's lived all over kind of the eastern half of the country for kind of his entire life. He's struggled with housing his entire life. His parents were very young, so that proved to be very difficult economics for him. And he currently lives with my family at the moment because he didn't feel safe living with his mother. So he wanted to have a little bit of send a message to the State House and his representatives. So I have a statement I'd like to read if that's cool with everybody. And are we doing good on time?
Yeah, we've got a few minutes. Are you here? Which one are you here for?
Not till 1:30, so
Okay, you might want to, we're getting kind of crowded in here.
do you want me to wait outside?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
I will read off. This is, of course, it's not me, this is his writing. My name is Donatello Vitale. Today, I would like to talk to you about my experience with Vermont housing. I was born in Newport, Vermont, to teen parents who were lower class citizens who both have lived most of their lives in poverty. Vermont is one of the most expensive states to live in, meaning that housing has been something in my life that I didn't always know if I was going to have it or not. I spent a few years of my early life living in homeless shelters and couch surfing with my mother, just scraping by enough to eat. Trying to keep me and my little sister fed was a challenge. At the time, I didn't realize that that wasn't something that people had to worry about. I thought that it was normal and that all my friends at school also didn't know where they were sleeping tonight. But as I grew, I found that it was, though not extremely rare to have that experience. I learned to force myself to always look out for myself, not to trust the people that we were staying with, to start providing for myself as soon as possible. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't have a roof over my head or a pillow under it. I have stayed with people with bad intentions, and I've been hurried out of the homes of the people who did have good intentions, but my family was too paranoid to let them help. Me and my family had learned to never want help from strangers because they always want something back. I believe that no child should have to live in fear of this. No child should think it's normal not to eat some nights. No child should be sharing a room with 5 others and think that it's a luxury that there aren't 6. I hope that with my voice, I can help the lives of more children in my situation. I think the government should increase spending on helping families with children find homes, or at least help let people know about the programs that are available. Especially because as the years go on, housing gets more expensive, and the gap between families that work low-income jobs and the amount of money that they need to survive is much too large. Thank you for representing me as a citizen, and thank you for letting me speak about the issues that I feel are most important.
Thank you for your testimony and his.
Thank you so much.
You got it.
Oh,
Can I
yes,
ask a quick question?
go ahead.
Is Leo sorry, you're Leo.
Yeah.
Is Donatello, is that his name?
Donatello, yes.
Yeah. Is he an adult or a minor?
He's 16 years.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
you got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So that concludes this part of our testimony today on the Fair Housing Awareness Day. I thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you.
and spending time with us. We are now going to turn to H 173. And I think what I'm gonna do is, would people like to have a break now?
see our witnesses.
So shall we, they might be waiting outside. Would people like to have a break now?